I'm calling to order this hearing. This is a public hearing of the Committee of the Whole of the Council of the District of Columbia. I'm Phil Mendelson, Chairman of the Council and Chair of the Committee of the Whole. Today is Friday, November 1st, 2024. The time is 10:18 in the morning. This hearing is being held in room 412 of the John A. Wilson Building. This hearing is also available to the public through the council's website, www.dccouncil.gov. I don't know that this is being broadcast live on cable television, but we do have our hearings posted there as well. The subject of this morning's hearing is consideration of two resolutions that were introduced at the request of the mayor. PR 25-991 entitled Nanny Helen Burroughs Corridor Small Area Plan Resolution of 2024 and PR 25-992 entitled Ivy City Small Area Plan Resolution of 2024. In her transmittal letter, Mayor Bowser described the Ivy City Small Area Plan as a guide to implement the comprehensive plan's policies for greater equity, housing opportunities, and resilience against climate change and environmental health impacts. As mayor, I'm proud of the district's investment in the new Crummell School Recreation Center, and I'm excited for the new affordable housing opportunities on the horizon for New York Avenue Northeast. The Small Area Plan presents a community-informed vision that charts a path for targeting resources toward neighborhood amenities, improve public spaces, strategies to reduce the environmental inequities, and affordable housing for all residents. The Ivy City Small Area Plan makes recommendations to produce and preserve affordable housing, increase community resilience, improve public space, and to celebrate the community's rich culture. The Small Area Plan lays out a roadmap for adding new housing, public space infrastructure, and support services that will expand opportunities for longtime residents to stay in the neighborhood, decrease the impacts of industrial uses, and generate a public realm that emphasizes connection and gathering thanks to the advocacy engagement from members of the community. With regard to the Nanny Helen Burroughs Small Area Plan, the mayor's transmittal letter said this: the Nanny Helen Burroughs Corridor Small Area Plan serves as a guide to implement the comprehensive plan's policies for greater equity, sustainability, resiliency, and housing opportunities. As mayor, I'm proud of the district's investments in the Deanwood Great Streets, Nanny Helen Burroughs Avenue and Minnesota Avenue Strategic Development Plan of 2008, and the Deanwood Retail Market Analysis and Near-Term Enhancement Strategy of 2027. The Small Area Plan presents a community-informed vision for the creation of a vibrant mixed-use corridor with neighborhoods serving retail, stronger pedestrian safety and multimodal connectivity, and better access to parks and green spaces. The Nanny Helen Burroughs Corridor Small Area Plan includes recommendations to support housing, economic, and public realm needs of both longtime and new residents, and to celebrate the rich history and culture of the community. These recommendations will expand opportunities for affordable home ownership and rental housing, support legacy businesses, and create new retail spaces, improve connectivity to Marvin Gaye Park, and guide the design and future development in the public right-of-way. The hearing notice for today's hearing says the stated purpose of PR 25-991 is to approve the proposed Nanny Helen Burroughs Corridor Small Area Plan. The Small Area Plan was initiated by the Office of Planning in April 2023. A draft was made public July 1st, 2024, and the mayoral hearing was held on August 3rd, 2024. The stated purpose of PR 25-992 is to approve the proposed Ivy City Small Area Plan. The Small Area Plan was initiated by the Office of Planning in October 2021. A draft was made public July 1st, 2024, and a mayoral hearing was held on August 3rd, 2024. If the council takes no action on these plans, on these resolutions, they will be deemed approved on Friday, December 20th, 2024. The purpose of this hearing is to afford the public an opportunity to comment on the plans, as well as us to hear from the Office of Planning with regard to their understanding and intent regarding the small area plans. Today's hearing is divided by the two different resolutions, so we're going to begin by hearing testimony on PR 25-991, which is the Nanny Helen Burroughs Corridor Small Area Plan Resolution of 2024. Our custom is to hear from public witnesses, and then at the end of the hearing, to hear from the government witness, which in this case is Anita Cozart, the Director of the Office of Planning. So I'm going to call the first four witnesses: Cheryl Michelle Jones, Gregory Caston, Guy Riddick, and Leron Douglas. Now, this concerns the Nanny Helen Burroughs Corridor Small Area Plan. I'm saying that because I think Mr. Caston wants to testify about the Ivy City plan. Maybe on both. Are they here?
Michelle Jones.
You are?
You
Yes,
unmute.
absolutely.
Okay.
Mr. Caston, you're here. If you want to testify on Nanny Helen's, come forward. Got a lot of shy people in the room. It's okay. So we have Guy Riddick, we have Gregory Caston, Michelle Jones is online, and Leron Douglas is not here. And I'm going to go in this order. Ordinarily, I limit witnesses to 3 minutes. Be a little bit easier. There's a clock that you can see, so please be mindful of the clock. Ms. Jones, you're first.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Esteemed council members, good morning.
Good morning.
I appreciate this opportunity to address the Nanny Helen Burroughs Corridor Small Area Plan. I would also like to extend my gratitude to the Office of Planning for their diligent work on this document and their commitment to engaging the community throughout the planning process. Again, my name is Michelle Jones. I'm a proud Washingtonian and an alumnus of Spingarn High School, class of '73, as well as a graduate of the University of the District of Columbia. My roots trace back to Parkside and Deanwood, and I currently reside in the Benning Heights area. My civic involvement began in the era of the late Lorraine Whitlock and James and Ethel Onley, some of whom may be familiar with you all. I present this testimony not as a resident of Ward 7, but also as an advocate for historic preservation. After reviewing the Nanny Helen Burroughs Corridor Small Area Plan, I would like to highlight the executive summary vision on page 2. The 4 pillars outlined in the vision statement are likely to steer the Office of Planning. However, I have concerns regarding how we will preserve the history and culture along the Nanny Helen Burroughs Corridor in the future. While I recognize that change is inevitable, it should not come at the expense of our community's rich fabric. It is crucial to consider narratives that could be lost if we disregard our history. Our community wishes to see the legacy and the advancement made by our pioneers endure, not disappear. Specifically, I would like to address the statement on page 31 regarding street conditions, and I quote, "Multiple properties along Nanny Helen Burroughs will likely redevelop over the next 30 years," end quote. The accompanying rendering suggests a vision that entails demolition and a reimagined Nanny Helen Burroughs Avenue, devoid of acknowledging the small businesses. So my question to the Office of Planning, does this imply that we should anticipate the eradication of small businesses along Nanny Helen Burroughs Avenue? Will our history be bulldozed alongside these new establishments? I look forward to the next phase of this plan. So my time is up. I do not wish to see the decimation of fabric of history, our self-sustaining community. While the streetscape proposals are acceptable, the introduction of large businesses and apartment complexes could severely impact the Deanwood community along with this corridor. I urge the Office of Planning to reconsider the approach to include reimagined small businesses, new facades, and innovative building materials without erasing the essence of our small businesses landscape along Nannie Helen Burroughs Avenue. Furthermore, I would like to point out an error on the Office of Planning documentation. The document referenced Division Street. That should change to Division Avenue, as there is no Division Street in this area. On page 8, in the historic content section, I would like to highlight the Nannie Helen Burroughs School, Women and Girls, founded by Nannie Helen Burroughs, for whom the corridor is named. She was a remarkable woman of faith, a visionary, a pioneering businesswoman, and a champion of Black suffrage. I strongly encourage the council members to read the full document prepared by the DC Historic Preservation Office to gain a deeper understanding of her significant contributions. This document is well researched, illustrated, and succinct. I extend my gratitude to all involved in its creation. As we collaborate with the office to secure the National Register of Historic Places status for the Nannie Helen Burroughs campus, our goal is to make it a prominent gem along the corridor. On page 24, regarding parks and green spaces, Office of Planning, please remove the additional L from Helen. Additionally, there is no recommendation for addressing flooding under the Minnesota Avenue and Nannie Helen Burroughs Avenue viaduct, which has
Ms.
been
Jones,
I'm
Ms.
sorry.
Jones, I am going to cut you off at this point because you've been 5
Okay.
minutes.
Okay,
And I do have
I'm
your
sorry.
statement.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My apologies.
No, don't apologize. Mr. Caston? Microphone.
I'm sorry, I think I can make up some of that time. I'm here to testify more for the Ivy City Small Area Plan, but when I saw this plan was here, I just wanted to alert everyone that the Strand Theater, a historic property that the district has helped me reinvigorate, is open, and the Strand sign that was there through the 70s shall return before December 1st, no later than Christmas. And I do think it's a wonderful area and get a lot of rich opportunity, as Ms. Jones talked about, and I'm here in support of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Guy Riddick?
Thank you, Chairman. I first like to give, of course, my gratitude and thanks to Ms. Crane Kemp and their entire team. They've had us as a community involved since, I believe, the first meeting I attended was March 16th. So thank you so much for that. I've lived in the corridor. I live more on the Capitol View side, and my family and I have lived there for the last 10 years. I am a native Washingtonian, and my children go to, of course, DC public schools. And our home sits at the top of Division Avenue and Blaine Street, and to the left, we can see to the right, we can see Richardson dwellings, also called Clay Terrace, and to the left, we can see Lincoln Heights from my front porch. And I've been so thankful for the Office of Planning for having the vision to do some responsible redevelopment to the Nannie Burroughs corridor. I'm so excited about the plans that they've provided us for redevelopment of Richardson dwellings, as well as Lincoln Heights. They are two housing communities that I think are more than 79 years old. Many of the buildings are abandoned, and it's just really an eyesore for our community as a whole. So I look forward to the future and hopefully having that being redeveloped responsibly, because we do like the charm of our community. We do not want to be overdeveloped, but we would like some options, as many meetings we've said, options for retail and things such as that. But we do look forward to the redevelopment of that area in the years to come. We appreciate our community And we love the city, but we also want to make sure that it is done responsibly. And again, we thank them for continuing to keep us involved, to keep us, our opinion felt that it matters. And we really do look forward to the next phase of the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Riddick. So would it be fair to summarize your testimony as you're okay with redevelopment, but not overdevelopment?
That is correct, Chairman. We do want to keep the charm of our community, but we do look forward to, as the mayor, of course, has said many times, her affordable housing initiatives. We have all of Lincoln Heights and all of Richardson Dwellings, and I hope that it will be an area that she can push that initiative and update the buildings, update the facade, and bring some mixed use to that community.
Thank you. And let me ask Ms. Jones. Ms. Jones, when you were testifying, I was thrown off a little bit about saying that you want to see more to preserve the history and culture along Nannie Helen Burroughs, but I think where you were going was similar to what Mr. Riddick just said, that some redevelopment is desirable, but not overdevelopment. Would that be a fair way of characterizing your testimony?
So specifically, he's referring to the housing behind Nannie Helen Burroughs Avenue. I am talking about specifically on Nannie Helen Burroughs Avenue, where small businesses have been on that avenue for centuries, for years. So I'm not talking about the development regarding Richardson Dwellings and Clay Terrace. Yes, I do believe that affordable housing or mixed use, which way they want to use it, is needed for that area. But my concern specifically is actually on Nannie Helen Burroughs Avenue.
Okay, now there's a statement in your testimony, the introduction of large businesses and apartment complexes could
Correct.
severely impact the Deanwood community along this corridor. I take that to mean overdevelopment.
So with that, I was referring to the rendering, as I said, on page 31. Now, if the rendering is referring specifically to Nannie Helen Burroughs Avenue itself, then I would definitely oppose that. But if it is referring to the areas as my resident, my neighbor is referring to, which is Clay Terrace, Richardson Dwellings, then yes, but not specifically on Nannie Helen Burroughs Avenue. Again, I'm looking at or would like to see small, the low-rise small businesses, if they're going to stay in our area, reimagined, as opposed to the large apartments or homes on Nannie Helen Burroughs Avenue.
Yeah, I think that those renderings are 5 or 6 story buildings, which we
Yes.
consider to be somewhere between moderate and medium density, as opposed to high density. And I will ask the Office of Planning Director, because I don't remember what the comprehensive plan calls for in terms of density there. The small area plan is supposed to be consistent with the comprehensive plan. But it seems to me that the tension here is having redevelopment, but at the same time, sort of not having redevelopment by preserving what's existing.
So it's not so much tension, my and others who aren't testifying or have spoken with, we're talking specifically redevelopment, but not, as you said, overdevelopment, and not destroying the businesses, the businesses that are currently on Nannie Helen Burroughs Avenue, which makes up the rich fabric of Nannie Helen Burroughs Avenue. The corridor, I guess, when you're talking about the corridor, I suspect you're talking about along Minnesota Avenue, along Division, where the Richardson dwellings are and where Clay Terrace is. I am talking specifically where the Strand Theater is. Okay, we've done some apartment buildings where the Strand Theater is. There are a few larger buildings on Nanny Helen Burroughs Avenue, but then again, there are a lot of small businesses too that are on Nanny Helen Burroughs Avenue, which we would like to preserve and not see bulled over and
All
not
right.
destroyed. And
All
I
right,
and that's the Minute grocery store right there on the corner of 44th and Nanny Helen Burroughs Avenue. We have there's a tire place on Nanny Helen Burroughs Avenue. There is the Washington Funeral Home, small business right across from Nanny Helen Burroughs campus. That's what I am specifically referring to.
Okay. I'm going to thank you for your testimony. Mr. Riddick, we don't have a statement from you. If you want to give us a written statement, not required, but it would be helpful. And we'll include that in the record. You could do it the same place you went to sign up. All right, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Caston. You probably don't have to get up because I'm going to call you for the next group. So we're going to turn to the Ivy City Small Area Plan Resolution. Robert Vincent Branham, who's chairman of the Ward 5 Leadership Council Public Safety Committee. Sabrina Rhodes, who's a community organizer with Empower DC. Andronette Willis. Brenda Ingram. If I'm calling your name and you're here, please come forward. And Greg Caston. Whoa, how did we get? Yeah, we got 4 people, 4 chairs. All right, I don't see Mr. Branham online. So we'll begin with Ms. Rhodes.
Thank you. Good morning. Great day, Chairman Mendelson, council and staff and witnesses. My name is Sabrina Rose, the community organizer with Empower DC and the ANC in Ward 5's Ivy City. I'm also a proud lifelong resident of the district and proud to be representing my community. If anyone knew how excited we were in 2021 to first find out we were given the opportunity to have a small area plan for Ivy City, along with Cornell getting renovated. We helped with ideas, tours, meetings, workshops, and everything that was blended to make this document what it is now. This shows a dramatic change that the decisions OP has given is the message that there will be community-led planning instead of developers coming here to lead planning for profit while ignoring the community's needs. Per the Ivy City Small Area Plans, the plan clarifies how the comprehensive plan policies should be implemented, propose a wide range of strategies to increase shade in the public and private areas, develop new green spaces, implement infrastructure like resiliency hubs throughout the community at Cornell and the NEP site, which will be taken by eminent domain. I'm putting it out there. And public ministers to combat the urban heat island effect. DOEE's Ivy City Resiliency Strategy planning has already begun. There are many housing recommendations. Affordability should be 30% to 50% AMI. There are 8 new housing recommendations due to Empower DC's advocacy with the Ivy City residents and pushback on recommendations we didn't agree with. The numbers of the recommendations will be in my testimony. Some promotion of future housing uses on existing PDR properties and neighborhoods that's compatible maker spaces and new mixed-use parcels. But remember, that Ivy City is a historic 151 this year old community with lifelong residents. This plan is built through a racial equity lens. Although in the 1930s, Ivy City began designating it for commercial and industrial uses, our community didn't start out like that. The residents have always advocated for Ivy City, who were mostly Black families who resided here and dealt with the historical discriminatory land use and development practices. But now guidance will come from the Office of Racial Equity. Page 16 of the plan states that OP developed the Ivy City Small Area Plan with considerations for potential impacts of the social determinants of health, which are defined as a condition in which people are born, live, learn, work, play, that affect a wide range of outcomes. We also, I just want to wrap up that we are in opposition of the height development. They're proposing 10 stories on Oakey Street and New York Avenue that will overwhelm our historic community. So the step down that Office of Planning had proposed is great, but we want to make sure that we still have our historic community not being overwhelmed by tall buildings on New York Avenue and Oakey Street. Thank you for allowing me to testify.
Thank you, Ms. Rhodes. And I don't have a copy of your statement.
I'll send it.
Please.
Mhm.
Antoinette Willis?
Good morning. My name is Antoinette Willis, and I have lived in Ivy City most of my life, on and off for over 56 years, where I raised my sons and helped my son raise his daughter, my granddaughter Maya, who is in for her first year of college. My son purchased our home in Ivy City about 17 years ago, and we plan to keep this investment for generations to come. I wanted to make sure that years ago, when we started working with the Office of Planning, started with the walkthrough, that it was clear we wanted to be of this process, that our wishes are to have Cremiel renovated, the school buses to be removed, DPW is moved, which we hear they are relocating, flooding and heat issues resolved, and we don't want more clubs or lounges, but we want a welcoming and warm community. If our homes flood, they will not be worth anything. We want deeply affordable housing, but I'm not happy about all the tall buildings the city wants to put in our neighborhood. I want to be able to enjoy my neighborhood. I have spent all my life in, not have it fixed after we have spent all our lives there through the neglect. For folks who have not invested their lives here, there's so much potential here. It doesn't make sense to not work together. The Office of Planning is working with us and we are working with them. We need green space and green amenities as long as they are being maintained, because their major pollutants and facilities, including New York Avenue, is making us sick, especially the seniors like I am and folks with compromised immune system. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Willis. And if you could provide us a copy of your statement, I'd appreciate that. Brenda Ingram?
Good morning. My name is Brenda Ingram. I have lived in Ivory City since 1965. I am an alumni of Cromwell. I worked my first summer job there for the Department of Recreation in the early 70s. I worked at a recording studio in Ivory City 10 years after I graduated high school, McKinley Tech class of 75. And then I was a GSA contract guard for 5 years. And I worked in the government since 1989 to 2016. Then I retired from St. Elizabeth Hospital. While working in the government, I purchased my home on Central Place, and I still live there today. which was owned by Deacon Crow, who was the president of the Ivory City Trinidad Civic Association and was known as the mayor of Ivory City. As you see, I carry a lot of history from my community, and I'm proud to say that. Since the closing of Carmel, I have been an advocate for the future of the community and Carmel, to have it become the place for the youth to enjoy and have the same benefits I had. For these reasons is why it is so important to prevent displacement, because my neighbors and I want our children and grandchildren to be able to afford to stay here if they choose to, or choose to purchase a home without being forced out due to high housing costs, and to keep the historic character from disappearing because of the tall buildings. Ivory City has always had older apartment buildings, single-family homes with Carmel sitting in the middle of the neighborhood. We want to keep the feel of the history in our neighborhood. Sometimes stress while working with the Office of Planning for years on the Ivory City Small Area Plan, but we do need more green space and some housing. If it is deeply affordable, with more jobs for residents, and to get rid of the National Engineering Product Facility, a major polluter that has been making our air toxic for decades. I would appreciate if you plan to fix the issue that is currently messed up rather than add more. Our air is highly polluted and toxic, which has been addressed. We live in an EJ community. Adding more buildings and not addressing our issues would make it worse. We also need to address the heat because of the lack of green space. Carmel's renovation, we're helping to plan, and to finally have a healthy, vibrant environment that we feel welcomed in and can enjoy with our families. Thanks for allowing me to testify. Any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Ingram. And it would also be helpful if we had a copy of your statement. Great, thank you. Mr. Caston?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Greg Caston. I am the owner of ProFish and Ivy City Smokehouse. I've submitted my testimony, and the first 3 or 4 paragraphs are about history, and I think that issue's been covered here. My testimony, I'd like to say, when the Office of Planning released the draft of the small area plan for comments, it did not include any supplemental planning or guidance or specific recommendations to the future land use map or zoning changes for either Ivy or Fenwick Streets. I and my legal counsel made comments at that time, which are attached here as part of my testimony. They're both verbal and writing to the Office of Planning. These comments are, the result was a few minor errors in the Ivy City Small Area Plan to consider Oakey and Fenwick Streets for mixed-use residential as part of the upcoming comp plan process. There is no supplemental planning analysis that takes a finer grain look at Ivy City for the potential to achieve mixed-use development under the current comp plan, nor are there any definitive recommendations for future changes to the FLUM. This is problematic and might set the table for none of the long-desired context-sensitive mixed-use development to ever happen in Ivy City. ProFish has operated at 1900 Fenwick Street for 36 years. Since opening, ProFish has grown into a premier wholesale distributor in Washington metro area. And from its 15,000 square foot warehouse, ProFish now serves 2,500 accounts, maintains 34 vehicles, and directly employs 140 people, the majority of which reside in the district and primarily in wards 5, 6, and 7. Since opening, the industrial surroundings around ProFish have changed somewhat dramatically, particularly with the Hex warehouse being converted to an apartment complex. What was once a neighborhood solely, or what was once the front half of the neighborhood devoted solely towards mixed use, is now, was devoted towards industrial is now mixed use. As the area continues to attract a wider mix of uses that draw larger volumes of pedestrians, bicyclists, passenger vehicles, Profish is experiencing challenges. Profish is and has been committed to Ivy City and the district. However, due to its success in the changing neighborhood, it's clear Profish is going to have to move. In order for it to do so, it's going to have to be able to develop that property in some meaningful way that will let it purchase another property within the district. Profish's Ivy City Development Plan can be advanced under the current comp plan, cannot be advanced under the current comp plan. Excuse me. The mix of uses, while appropriate, and you want me to just turn
No,
it in?
I've let everybody go over a little bit, so.
Yeah, thank you. In essence, I'll sum up. What's happening is the plan did not include specific references to what might happen on the Profish site. It left it in PDR. What might happen on the Ivy City site, it left it in PDR. So it becomes an unknown for Profish to be able to make business plans and what it's going to do and how it's going to do it. Further, there is some disagreement on our end as to the height issue, that we do not see the 110 feet coming off of New York Avenue, and the difference between that and the step down occurs on the Profish site, which would be detrimental also to the long-term plan, and we seek guidance and specific mention to that. And then most important, I would like to mention that what we're asking for in our comments is not abnormal in a small area plan. In fact, it was done in the Florida Avenue Market Plan, the Chevy Chase Small Area Plan, the Wisconsin Avenue Development Framework. And we're not saying that we want Ivy City to look like Union Market has turned into, but we are saying that if you don't provide for density, you're not going to get the goods and services and retail locations that this community wants and deserves. And I've seen that and experienced that over the last 40 years. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Caston. Give me just a second. So Ms. Rhodes and Ms. Willis and Ms. Ingram, your testimony was somewhat similar, although Ms. Ingram, you went into a little bit more detail about displacement. Would it be incorrect to say that generally you're in support of the small area plan that's been proposed?
Yes, we've been working with the Office of Planning, so yes, we are, we agree with this, we agree with it, we just don't agree with the height density. We don't want any residents to be displaced because of the proposed 4,000 new residents that will be coming into, or the proposed higher income, which is stated in the small area plan. Higher income residents that are looking to come to Ivy City to live. We don't want that to displace the current residents that are there.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Ms. Willis or Ms. Ingram, anything you want to add to that?
No.
We fought for Carmel so long. I don't think we can share Carmel with all them people.
Okay. And Mr. Caston, am I understanding your testimony that you would like to see the ability for greater development at your site, which then in turn will help to finance your moving to a bigger facility?
Correct. And I think also help the community achieve the density that they're looking for. Well, I absolutely respect and understand and agree with what these fine young ladies are saying. I think that having been a businessman in Ivy City for 40 years, and it has 2 or 3 times moved to the edge of flourishment only to be driven back because there just aren't enough customer base. There isn't enough customer base. And I think you can look at Nike, you can look at CVS, you can look at some of the other units, retailers that have come in and left. The City Winery, a number of restaurants, they have not been able to survive to be able to provide. It's a very isolated community, Ivy City. There's one bus and it's 9/10 of a mile from a metro in any direction. By and large, you're either walking a long way or waiting a period of time or using a motor vehicle or bicycle to get there. And I think without additional density, without more people that are in that neighborhood, not displacing, but adding to, that you would be better served in the long run in the Ivy City community as a whole and would set it up for success rather than failure. And again, this is not to say that the Ivy City that these ladies are referring to, which is from Alexander Crummell School towards West Virginia Avenue, shouldn't remain intact and not necessarily be overshadowed with tall buildings. But I think if you look at our plan and you look at some of the plan for the community, you can still achieve that, particularly on the Oki to Crummell School block, and stepping down, and particularly the Pro-Fish block, because it's actually additional PDR in between Pro-Fish and the community.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. I have your statement, so thank you. Thank you, each of you, for your testimony. Let me call the next group. Haley Morris, Parisa Noruzi, who's Executive Director of Empower DC. I did not see Parisa. I guess she's online. There she is. Aisha White. And Sydney Sauls. All right, I'm going to call folks in that order. Ms. Morris?
Good morning. My name is Haley Morris, and I'm a member of Empower EDC and a Howard University student. I was first introduced to Ivy City during the Siege Symposium, where I learned about their efforts to combat environmental injustices. Inspired by their work, I invited Sabrina Rhodes to speak to my club, the Howard University Water Environment Association. I'm excited to contribute to their efforts of building a community center in Ivy City. Our team of dedicated students plan to leverage our academic knowledge and skills by engaging in hands-on projects that directly benefit Ivy City residents. We will organize workshops focused on environmental conservation and justice and educating youth and community members about sustainable practices and their significance. Ivy City is a historic neighborhood celebrating 151 years of rich heritage. We will support them in advocating for the Crummell School, and we look forward to enjoying its renovation. However, we want to stress the importance of maintaining the proposed density along Oakey Street and New York Avenue to avoid overwhelming our historic community. The increase in development in Ivy City stems from the demand from higher income residents, as noted in the ICSAP final draft. Yet, Ivy City is already burdened by an overconcentration of industrial land use, resulting in poor environmental conditions, urban stress, pollution, and toxic exposure, contributing to negative health outcomes. Further densification will only exacerbate the challenges faced by a community that has called Ivy City home for generations. We acknowledge the Department of Public Works' proposal to relocate and emphasize the need for adequate funding for this site. Additionally, we propose establishing a special fund for anti-displacement efforts and a racial equity fund for Ivy City, with government oversight as a part of a community benefits agreement. By mobilizing volunteers from Howard University, we plan to create meaningful connections that foster collaboration and empower the community. In addition to educational initiatives, we are committed to advocating for the needs and aspirations of Ivy City residents. We will work closely with the Friends of Crummell and Empower DC members to ensure that the voices of the community are heard and prioritized in the planning process. Our goal is to support Ivy City residents in ensuring that the community center truly reflects the needs of its members. Together, we can build a vibrant space that serves as a hub for education, empowerment, and community connection. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Ms. Naruzzi, who's online.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Parisa Naruzzi, Executive Director of Empower DC, and I have personally worked with Ivy City residents since 2001 to elevate their needs, their priorities, their concerns around development in the community, environmental issues, housing issues, and of course, the Alexander Crummell School. I think one of the underlying issues here is, what is the purpose of the small area plan? Is it to identify and correct the history of harms that have been done to this community? Or is it to spur new high density development and bring in new residents? And we argue that the purpose of it should be first and foremost to identify the harms that have been done to this community and to create a path to repair. Again, Ivy City is a very unique DC community, a Black residential neighborhood founded in 1873 at a time that that area was surrounded by fields and farms. And it wasn't until the advent of zoning in the 1920s that this neighborhood became inundated with industrial lands because of racist land use practices. And, you know, just to name a few, of course, the trash transfer stations, multiple different types of industry that are polluting, the diesel trucks and buses, the parking fleet, the National Engineering Products Facility, and a proposed freeway that was to go through the community. So they really have weathered multiple environmental injustices, and it is far beyond time for us to create a path to repair the conditions. And then meanwhile, of course, it has experienced this rapid gentrification over the last, especially decade, 15 years or so, with little effort on the part of the city to do anything to stem displacement. So while there are numerous, I think, positive recommendations in the small area plan as a result of the community input, those are completely ineffective if they're not funded and implemented. If those measures are not funded and implemented, actually all the plan does is serve as a design guide for new development. We urge the City Council to make Ivy City a demonstration community and create policy, program, and budget to implement the key recommendations that ensure displacement prevention, improvement in environmental conditions, and to do that prior to the new dense development that will increase the displacement pressures. There's some really important data in this plan that underscores how vulnerable Ivy City residents are to displacement. The plan says that at least 1/3 of residents are at risk of displacement, 38% are receiving public benefits, 90% are renters, and the vast majority of both renters and homeowners are housing cost burdened. So I know my time is short, but I do want to urge you to consider this high dense development on New York Avenue. There's no evidence that Office of Planning undertook any planning, studies, or even engagement with the ANC prior to proposing those changes in the last comp plan. The actual documents that OP provided to the council on those changes says it was done on behalf of area landowners who have not been identified. And we really question the lack of racial equity analysis, the lack of planning and process, and actually even the refusal to even discuss the height of New York Avenue through this small area planning process. I would ask for you, Chairman, to ask Anita Cozart, how did those FLUM changes come about? What was the planning? And I thought it was really interesting, the conversation in the Nannie Helen Burroughs section where we were talking about overdevelopment. How does the Office of Planning identify at what level are we overdeveloping? Right now, we're talking about more than doubling the population of the neighborhood just on New York Avenue alone. And that doesn't include the other sites where new housing is likely to be developed on Oakey and Fenwick and Kendall, et cetera. We must get the council's support to pass the legislation to take the NEP site by eminent domain and turn that into a resilience hub. This is a critical component of a path forward to repair. It should have never been placed there. It is a legacy polluter. grandfathered in. It is a primary example of environmental injustice. And in order to replace it with a hub that incubates green job opportunities and pollution prevention strategies would be a great demonstration of how to start and initiate that repair. So again, we will be coming back to the council through the comp plan process to revise the heights on New York Avenue, to secure funding for additional planning, for additional housing interventions and displacement interventions. And that directly aligns with what the city has said it wants to do with the REACH Act and with the anti-displacement provisions in the comprehensive plan. We look forward to working with you on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Naruzzi. I don't have a copy of your statement. Are you going to submit it?
I will submit it, yes.
All right. I do want to give you a little bit of a hard time because you're a seasoned witness and it really helps us if we have your statement when you're testifying. So you'll submit it. Ms.
Agreed.
White, Aisha White.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Aisha White. I'm an artist, entrepreneur, and nonprofit director. I live in Ward 5, Ivy City to be exact, across the street from the Crummell School. And I've been there for the past 2 years. I'm a member of Friends of Crummell and Empower DC. The increase in development in Ivy City and the small area plan is geared towards new future residents and does not prioritize the needs of current residents. We are excited about the Crummell School renovations, and I recognize the Office of Planning for their work, but at every meeting with them, I'm only thinking, am I going to be able to afford my rent in 2 to 3 years? There are mentions of gentrification and the need for affordable housing in the plan, but it lacks concrete ways forward to preserve and uplift the neighborhood. We need funding attached to the anti-displacement and racial equity strategies specifically designed for Ivy City. We've seen the story play out across the city, and it's disappointing to see a lack of creativity in the small area plan. The small size of Ivy City makes it perfect for to institute innovative and groundbreaking plans led by the council. I want to see OP knocking on every door with resources on how to purchase their home from their landlord. I want to see TOPA education meetings. I would love to see landlord and property owner education on how to support the neighborhood. What about potential rent freezes and enforcements on requirements on affordable apartments? I know the city is filled with research institutes, universities, and teams that can support the city in creating a density plan that meets the needs of the housing and does not overwhelm and displace current residents. Lastly, I want to see improved timelines for development that start the improvements to the neighborhood now while we live here, not in 5 to 6 years when the development constructions are complete. This is a true marker of gentrification, who you are building for. Lewis Crow Park is a perfect example. It's like the city is waiting for someone else and someone different to use the park instead of providing space for the folks that occupy the space now, or NEP and not being able to open our windows to the smell when they are operating. In summary, I would like us to use more creativity when it comes to addressing issues in our city. We have the power and intellect on our side. Let's put it to work, and we're asking the city to put the funding behind it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. White. If you could provide your statement, please. Sydney Sauls, who's participating virtually.
Hi, I will not be providing testimony today.
Thank you. Trying to think of what questions I want to ask. I think what I'm going to do is give myself a minute and defer to the Ward 5 council member who's joined us. Councilmember Parker, if you have any questions.
Thank you, Chairperson Mendelson. I will offer just brief remarks and then I'll jump into questions. This small area plan is a long time coming. It's critically important for an area in Ward 5 and in our city that has faced longstanding injustices, both environmental but also disinvestment. And I know community members writ large are highly interested in the future in the planning for Ivy City. That includes residents, that includes advocacy groups, business owners. It is important for me that we strike the right balance. For context, I did write to the Office of Planning, pushing back on their original draft proposal, asking them for deeper clarification around their racial justice implications in their plans, to ask them to spell out in more detail some information about the density that they were proposing, and to ensure that there was greater thought placed on the environmental harms that persist in Ivy City. I want to acknowledge that Office of Planning did come back with a revised version, and I do appreciate that. My hope is that today's hearing will allow us to get more testimony around how this plan could be strengthened. And I want to thank everybody for being here. That said, Parisa, I want to come to you and acknowledge that Empower DC has been highly active in Ivy City, and there would be no future Cromell Center without the work of Empower DC, and I want to acknowledge that on the record. When you talk about the density and there being an effort to double density along New York Avenue, what is the concern that you have for existing residents in Ivy City? If you can spell that out for us, that would be helpful.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Councilman. And thanks for all of your support for the Ivy City community, and especially the introduction of the NEP, eminent domain bill. The density issue is, again, we are not against new housing or even taller buildings, but it does need to be evaluated. There does need to be study and planning, and nobody has considered what is the impact of 4,000 new residents on New York Avenue in Ivy City alone. I have not seen any planning that document anywhere, and there was no discussion of that in this planning process. So Ms. Brenda raised the issue of what does that mean for competition for the use of the new community center? That's just one consideration. What does it mean for access to other public services and amenities? What does it mean for transportation and traffic and pedestrian safety? So my point is that this to me is a prime example of something that's very politically driven and profit driven. Developers have been asking for the upzoning of New York Avenue for decades. I remember John Ray, and him representing Richard Cohen, who owns one of those sites, and asking for the council to approve this kind of density for many, many years. But there has never been an attempt to look at how will this contribute to displacement pressures? How will this impact quality of life? And it seems extreme to me to more than double the population of a small neighborhood just in one row alone. And again, that's not considering the other new housing that we expect will be built in the area as well. I'd like the Office of Planning to talk about how do they evaluate the impact of that?
Yeah, and I'll be sure to ask that. But I know you've worked with communities across the city and are working in communities across the city. What are some models or examples you would point us to that represent more thoughtful development that you would want represented in Ivy City?
Well, I think the most critical thing is that the displacement prevention measures need to be implemented first. We always talk about displacement too late, it's after the fact. So we are already acknowledging, we're saying that this is going to have a displacement effect. Okay, so let's do all of these things. And that's why I'm saying we need to make investment and have implementation of the recommendations in the plan before we see the neighborhood population doubling, right? So I think that that's one of the most critical things. And then I think listening to the residents and, the height does have an impact on people. And I don't think anybody in the neighborhood is saying, no, keep it at 2 stories or 4 stories, but let's have an open, transparent conversation. And I think that transparency is really lacking when it comes to the New York Avenue development. We actually submitted a FOIA to Office of Planning requesting any planning documents that underpinned that, identifying who the landowners were, that kind of stuff. We have not gotten anything in return. It's past the deadline now, and they have not responded.
Understood. I'm going to ask one more question, although I'm over my time. What would you like to see the council do as it relates to this plan with Office of Planning before we take it up for a vote?
I would like for there to be an outline of what the implementation will, the commitments for implementation, right? And I understand that not everything happens within the small area plan, but again, a commitment that the council is going to pass legislation or make budgetary allocation to ensure implementation, to track that through the oversight process, and to make sure that the zoning decisions and the development decisions take place after meaningful implementation of the anti-displacement measures. I think this is the first small area plan that, you know, really was undertaken under the new racial equity lens requirement of the comp plan. And I think that there's still work to be done. I think a lot of improvements were made after the public comment that should have been incorporated into the first draft if it was really done with a racial equity lens. And so I think the council needs to require the Office of Planning to define what is the racial equity lens approach to planning. They haven't really done that. And there's also a requirement in the comp plan of an anti-displacement strategy that we've heard nothing about, really almost nothing. So why are we slow walking these critical things while we're advancing, you know, the more dense development?
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Parker. Ms. Morris, in your statement, and thank you for giving us a copy of your testimony, you said, we want to stress the importance of maintaining the proposed density along Oakey Street and New York Avenue to avoid overwhelming our historic community. Did you mean proposed density or existing density?
I don't feel like I'm qualified to answer that question because I wasn't in those meetings. But
Okay,
I believe Sabrina might be able to.
well, she's already testified, so.
Yeah.
Ms. Neruzzi, so you piqued me when you responded to Councilmember Parker saying you want to see commitments for implementation. What does that mean? I got some sense from what you were saying, but let's go over. So you
Yeah.
start.
Well, I think we probably need the council to pass some type of legislation that identifies Ivy City as an anti-displacement community or, you know, define it in some way, and then creates an allocation of resources to undertake the additional planning that's called for, to undertake the investment in housing. I want to point out that if we don't do additional investment in affordable housing, we're relying on inclusionary zoning to be the bulk of the so-called new affordable housing, and those income limits are beyond the median income of Ivy City residents and will not prevent displacement. So,
Okay, well,
yeah. Mhm.
is there more? I'm looking for a list before I come
Yes.
back on these. So council legislation identifies Ivy City as a, I forget exactly the phrase, I wrote down displacement area.
Displacement risk area, anti-displacement area, however we want to term it. I think
And then
it's
with a budget to go along with that, what
With a
would be
budget.
next? What would be next on your list?
next on the list is to pass the eminent domain, implement the eminent domain of NEP and the conversion of that site to a community resilience hub. And our goal is to really utilize the opportunity to grow green jobs in Ivy City. And this has been discussed in city planning documents for decades, but there's been no movement on it whatsoever. That New York Avenue and Ivy City in particular are a prime location for the incubation of a new green job workforce for the city. And so we would like to see that take root. We would like to see the removal of the DPW trucks and buses on West Virginia Avenue, and a planning process initiated to develop dedicated affordable housing and green spaces on that site. Could be a great site for social housing, for instance. And similarly, additional planning for the Lewis Crow site to determine whether deeply affordable housing is an option there, as well as green spaces. Those are, I mean, I think the other things are, you know, the housing related things is the preservation of the existing affordable housing, the funding for tenant purchase, and for preserving the small apartment buildings that are affordable. A land trust strategy would be a great opportunity here in Ivy City. And then, of course, when we get to the development, the zoning decisions and the development down the road, there should be this fund that we create to incubate community development in Ivy City could be something that the developers pay into as part of a community benefits agreement. We could utilize strategies like tax increment financing to leverage the new investment in the area in support of the community development.
So the commitments for implementation seem to be mostly on the council side, not Office of Planning.
Well, my understanding is that Office of Planning is not the implementing agency on most of those recommendations, except
Of
we
the
would,
recommendations you gave, correct.
well, even in the small area plan, DHCD is listed as for a number of them. I mean, I think the additional planning efforts, you know, of course, OP should be responsible for. And I will just raise that I'm really concerned about OP's role with zoning. I feel that the neighborhood level planners are way more in touch with the considerations of the community, but the development review section, which advises the zoning commission, seems to be much more just an arm of the mayor's office and her development agenda. So I anticipate that we're going to face, you know, resistance at the zoning commission in terms of, you know, challenging the height and density on New York Avenue because of its impact on displacement. And you know, getting real affordable housing commitments for some of the new development.
Okay, so you've answered that question. Now, the only way that there could be commitments from the council would be by council action. For instance, I
Yes.
can't sit here and commit anything regarding the council. It takes 7 votes for the council to be committed. And so none of that could happen until next year, which suggests then that you would land on our disapproving the small area plan?
So I am not saying that you should disapprove it, only because I think the majority of the recommendations are sound. I would like for you, in your approval of it, to note that the council should create investment to ensure that those recommendations are implemented. If those recommendations are not implemented, then this plan is only helpful to developers. It's not helpful to the community at all. But I think this is something that we face all the time, right? We do plans and then they sit on a shelf, or only certain ideas are cherry picked. So maybe you can suggest to us would it be more appropriate to not approve it and have it come back to the council in the beginning of the next year with the community development package attached to it?
Well, I think I can't remember the last time the council disapproved a small area plan. I think it might be never.
Right, that's what I thought.
And a small area plan is meant to give guidance for implementing the comprehensive plan. And in terms of land use development is guided, I shouldn't say guided, is implemented entirely by the private sector. All that the government does is guide it. So we say we want high density here. It's up to the private sector whether they even want to develop there, wherever we're talking about. We say we want low density. It's up to the private sector whether they're interested in doing any development. The only development that the district would do would be building a government office, or in a long time since we've built any housing ourselves. So, I mean, that's just what a plan is it's to guide the government, giving guidance, limits, or incentives to the private sector. And then it's up to the private sector whether it does anything.
And I think that the city plays a much more active role in development than the way you're describing it. There is a lot of subsidy, there's a lot of politics involved in most development. So I think what we're asking is for the
Yeah, I
city
don't
to-
deny that, but
Yeah.
you know, we put in the budget last year, meaning 6 months ago, incentives for revitalizing downtown. And those incentives involve subsidies, what you just said, but it's still up to the private sector whether anybody's going to bite.
Yeah, I think that the DC government, DHCD, the DC Housing Authority, who owns Lewis Crow Park, you know, the DPW site is a DC government owned site. I think at least with initiating planning initiatives and RFPs, soliciting development proposals, that emphasize the dedicated, deeply affordable housing and green space. I mean, the DC government will play a key role in spurring that. And then, yeah, I think the DC government needs to pass some policies that protect communities like Ivy City and ensure that in any neighborhood like Ivy City, there is significant implementation of the anti-displacement measures ahead of the dense development that is expected.
Thank you. I'm over my time. Thank you very much for your testimony. Thank you, each of you, especially those who are in person. And Ms. Naruzzi, don't forget, give us a copy of your statement.
I will. Thank you.
This gets us to Ms. Cozart, Director of the Office of Planning. And give me a second before you start. Thank you, Ms. Cozart. When you're ready.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Mendelson, Councilmember Parker, and staff of the Committee of the Whole. My name is Anita Cozart, and I'm the Director of the DC Office of Planning. I'm pleased to share with the committee the Nannie Helen Burroughs Corridor Small Area Plan transmitted to the Council by Mayor Muriel Bowser and led by the Office of Planning. As outlined in the proposed resolution before you, the Nannie Helen Burroughs Corridor Small Area Plan presents a community-informed vision that guides future growth and revitalization of the Nannie Helen Burroughs Corridor. Nannie Helen Burroughs Avenue and surrounding neighborhoods, including Deanwood and Lincoln Heights, are historically Black communities with a rich history from Native American settlements to Black civil rights activism and prominent Black-owned businesses. Today, Nannie Helen Burroughs Avenue offers unique assets such as Marvin Gaye Park, situated along Watts Branch, the largest tributary in the district. However, the neighborhood lacks sufficient amenities that support community vibrancy and resilience. Changes passed by the council in the 2021 comprehensive plan update unlocked opportunities for increased housing, retail, and other community amenities along the avenue. In addition, the comprehensive plan's generalized policy map expanded the avenue's designation as a Main Street mixed-use corridor and identified the corridor as a resilience focus area due to flooding risks from Watts Branch. These updated land use policies allow for future mixed-use development of medium-density residential along with moderate-density commercial and expand on the district's environmental sustainability measures to increase community resilience. Specifically, the small area plan recommendations are organized into 4 core themes: housing and economic development, parks, green spaces and connectivity, public realm and urban design, and history and culture. The Nannie Helen Burroughs Corridor Small Area Plan includes recommendations as well as streetscape and design guidelines to guide future development and targeted community resources. Many of the recommendations address residents' desire to add mixed income housing and businesses along the corridor, improve connectivity, access and safety of local parks and green spaces, and increase flood mitigation. Strategies in the small area plan's housing and economic development section will guide inclusive growth by encouraging mixed-use development that includes a range of housing types for households of all incomes and sizes, with ground floor retail at key areas along the corridor. The small area plan also recommends the creation of a town center plaza at the intersection of 49th Street, which aims to activate a currently underutilized area of the corridor and improve the connection to Marvin Gaye Park.
In addition, the small area plan recommends incorporation of environmental sustainability features through landscaping and building design and construction techniques to minimize the risk of flooding. Finally, the small area plan celebrates the unique history and culture of the Nanny Helen Burroughs Avenue and surrounding neighborhoods by providing recommendations to commemorate and honor the people and places that have shaped this community. OP looks forward to working with partner agencies in the community to implement the recommendations and design guidelines outlined in the small area plan. The small area plan was developed with the support of community partners, including a community advisory committee comprised of residents, ANC commissioners, and civic leaders who advised on how, where, and when to engage the community. Through the development of the draft plan, OP led and participated in 18 community engagement activities, both virtual and in person. The engagement yielded over 300 participants across community workshops, online surveys, pop-ups, office hours, sessions, focus groups, and more. An open house event in June invited community members to review draft recommendations and discuss them with OP staff in advance of the full draft release in July. During the 45-day public comment period on the draft Nanny Helen Burroughs Corridor Avenue Plan, small area plan, OP hosted a mayoral public hearing on August 3rd at the Fontroy Community Center and received comments using an online form by phone and email. Updated racial equity policies in the 2021 comprehensive plan and the district's and OP's racial equity action plan inform the engagement process, the data analysis, recommendation development, and implementation approaches of the Nanny Helen Burroughs Corridor Small Area Plan. The Small Area Plan also acknowledges the history of discriminatory land use practices that have affected neighborhoods in DC, including Deanwood and the study area. OP worked closely with the Mayor's Office on Racial Equity on the application of a racial equity lens, both as a process and an outcome throughout the plan. In conclusion, I really want to take a moment to thank our staff who have led this planning process with great efforts to reflect community member voices throughout the process. Also, our district interagency partners who provided valuable subject matter expertise, and to Councilmember Gray and his staff for their dedicated time and support. I also want to thank the hundreds of residents who have engaged with OP on this small area plan, and particularly the members of ANC 7C. And lastly, I want to thank this committee for the opportunity to discuss the small area plan and encourage council to approve it promptly. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Chairman, would you like me to also read the testimony for Ivy City at this time? Okay, will do. So I'm pleased to share with the committee the Ivy City Small Area Plan transmitted to the council by Mayor Muriel Bowser and led by OP. As outlined in the resolution before you, the Ivy City Small Area Plan presents a community-informed vision that charts a future for Ivy City where all residents can thrive. Ivy City is a historically Black neighborhood founded around the B&O Railroad and the industries attracted residents to a job-rich area. A long legacy of community advocacy in service of better schools, public recreation spaces, and public health initiatives shows up today, even today, in a diverse, tight-knit community. However, residents of Ivy City have also faced prolonged environmental burdens and infrastructure inequities, which many have spoken about today. These are conditions that make residents vulnerable to displacement when neighborhood change occurs. The Ivy City Small Area Plan proposes how to manage change and elevate the quality of life through an approach that considers land use, equity, housing, urban design, and environmental sustainability. The changes that passed by the council in the 2021 comprehensive plan laid the groundwork for transitioning New York Avenue from a predominantly industrial corridor to a mixed-use one. These updated land use policies allow for high-density residential and commercial development with low-impact production, repair, and distribution uses. Over the next decade, this development could bring thousands of new affordable and market rate units, new retail and maker spaces, and an improved pedestrian realm. Specifically, the small area plan recommendations are organized into 3 core themes: housing affordability and opportunity, community resilience, and improvements to public space and urban design. The Ivy City Small Area Plan includes 30 recommendations and a set of design principles. Many of the recommendations address resident concerns about the cost of housing, the ability to stay in their neighborhood long-term. These include strategies for mitigating displacement pressures, expanding affordable housing opportunities, and supporting homeownership. The Small Area Plan also includes strategies that recognize the environmental inequities in Ivy City and recommend ways to increase tree planting and shade in public spaces, add new landscaped gathering spaces, and explore options for reducing the impact of production, repair, and distribution-focused businesses in the neighborhood. The goal of these environmentally focused recommendations is to improve local air quality and mitigate flood risk. In addition, the Small Area Plan includes recommendations that focus on the design and use of the built environment. These include re-envisioning Oakey Street as a neighborhood-serving commercial corridor, improving the pedestrian experience, and proposing design guidance to create building height transitions between the high-density development allowed along New York Avenue and the lower-scale residential in the neighborhood south of Alexander Crummell Way. OP looks forward to working with partner agencies and the community to implement the recommendations, the design principles, and all those that are in the Small Area Plan. The Ivy City Small Area Plan was developed in close collaboration with community partners, including the local ANC commissioner and community advocacy groups like Empower DC. Through the development of the draft plan, OP led and participated in 30 community engagement activities, both virtual and in person. The engagement reached over 310 participants through workshops, online surveys, pop-ups, office hours, sessions, focus groups, and more. An open house event in June 2024 was an opportunity for community members to review draft recommendations and discuss them with our staff in advance of that release of the full draft in July. During the 45-day public comment period on the Ivy City Small Area Plan, OP hosted a mayoral public hearing on August 3rd at Trinity Baptist Church and received comments via an online form and by email. Updated racial equity policies in the 2021 comp plan and the district's racial equity action plan, as well as OP's racial equity action plan, informed how we did engagement, our data analysis, and the development of recommendations and implementation approaches for the Ivy City Small Area Plan. The community dialogue involved confronting a history of discriminatory land use practices. OP also used data that is disaggregated by race where possible when analyzing neighborhood conditions, and drafted the Small Area Plan recommendations with recognition of disparate impacts across this historically Black community. OP also worked closely with the Mayor's Office of Racial Equity to apply a racial equity lens, both as a process and an outcome throughout the Small Area Plan. I also want to thank our staff who were dedicated to this particular Small Area Plan, and they have also taken great effort to make sure that the voices of community members were reflected throughout the process and in our final document. Our district agency partners also provided that wonderful subject matter expertise and valuable input, and really want to thank Councilmember Parker and his staff for dedicated time and support in this Small Area Plan. And in addition, our hundreds of residents who've engaged with us and lift up members of ANC 5D. Lastly, thank you to the committee for this opportunity to discuss the Small Area Plan again on this one. Encourage prompt council approval and happy to answer questions on both plans.
Thank you, Ms. Cozart. I have a question or two concerning the Nanny Helen Burroughs plan. Let me see where I am here. There was testimony which you heard I characterized it at one point as a tension between maintaining small businesses and some of the current character with encouraging redevelopment. How do you respond to that?
So I take the comment in context. Ms. Jones seemed to be referring to a diagram in the document. And that diagram admittedly did not necessarily, if you looked at the ground floor retail, which is where that historic retail would, we would look to place that, was you couldn't see a signal of that in the imagery that was there. That said, the recommendations and text that we had were certainly about honoring that, both in, as we think about housing and economic development, as well as the pieces that we had related to preservation planning and preservation of culture.
But the plan does call for, if I remember correctly, moderate or medium density residential along the avenue?
That's correct. And that's in line with the future land use designation that was part of the 2021 comp plan.
And do you recall if that predated that density designation predated the 2021 plan? Do you know?
That is I'll get back to you about, because it's a mixed use, which was increased, whether it was the residential or the commercial. And if it was so let me get back to you about that. I may be able to do that.
It does seem to me, though, that would be an appropriate planning, given that Nanny Helen Burroughs is a major avenue, when we look to having more density on major avenues.
That's correct. That would be in line.
So in any event, with regard to preserving existing small businesses or encouraging more small businesses, you see a place for that where there's redevelopment with the small area plans recommendations for ground floor retail.
That is correct. That is correct. Yes. And we have recommendations in the plan. I would point to recommendation 1.6 as one of those, and also 1.10 as recommendations that speak explicitly to that. The other recommendations are more implicit in their speaking to the inclusion of some of those existing businesses in future redevelopment.
Do you know, since Office of Planning does get approached by developers, do you know if there's a lot of development interest on Nanny Helen Burroughs right now?
A lot on a spectrum. Let's see. I think I'd probably want to categorize it on a spectrum. I would say they're probably on the lower end of the spectrum, and in some ways, part of this is, and what we heard from residents was wanting to see this plan move forward to start to move that interest farther along the end of the spectrum. That's about excitement about, bringing new business and amenities into the neighborhood.
Yeah, I was a little surprised when Mr. Caston testified. I'd forgotten about the Strand. I mean, that's been like years in the making.
Mm-hmm.
Emphasis years. Ms. Jones also testified there seems to be no recommendation for addressing flooding under Minnesota Avenue and Nanny Helen Burroughs viaduct. But in your statement, you speak to that being an issue.
Sure. So we would, one, there's text on page 24 that gives kind of context about some activities that are underway related to floodplain mitigations. And then I would specifically point to recommendation 2.5 and 2.6. 2.5 being around expanding awareness related to flood risk insurance, and then the Resilience Hub. A big part of the focus of the Resilience Hub is about helping residents in the context of some of those shocks and stressors that people.
Actually, there might be two issues here. So Watts Branch is a floodplain.
Mm-hmm.
And if I remember correctly, it's a rather significant risk. That's Watts Branch.
Mm-hmm.
What Ms. Jones was speaking to which may be related but is different, is the flooding under the bridges along 295.
Like interior flooding. Oh,
On the roads. Apparently, you
Right.
cannot get across, for instance, NHP, you cannot get to southbound 295 after it's a heavy rain.
I have personally experienced that, yes.
Yeah, so does
And
the plan speak to that?
so the plan speaks to that in the context of the, not with an explicit recommendation related to that, but with the contextual information about new DOE regulations related to that. And also some additional work that DOE is doing related to Watch Branch.
Okay, I'm going to shift to Ivy City. So there was some testimony. Most of it came from Ms. Naruzzi, at least the testimony that I'm going to ask you about, that there was an inadequate or no racial equity impact analysis, not working with the ANCs, no justification for the heights along New York Avenue, and no planning behind the call for 4,000 new residents. I just threw 4 things out at you. But then again, I only have a couple of minutes left and I'm trying to beat Mr. Parker on this.
So I will get straight to the point. So in terms of the land use recommendations that allow for the additional units in and along New York Avenue, that was part of the development of the 2021 comp plan update, and that included engagement of all ANCs. In many ways, we categorized our engagement as an ANC forward approach to collecting comments on the draft plan. So we asked ANCs if they submitted comments to us, whether they were through a resolution or otherwise, and we responded directly to each ANC that sent us comments, no matter how long they were. OP sent a response directly to ANC. So that was direct engagement around ANC points of view and perspectives related to the 2021 comp plan.
21 comp plan, but with
Yes.
regard to the small area plan, ANC engagement?
Say that again?
With regard to the small area plan, ANC engagement?
Yes, ANC engagement, they sent submitted, or they passed a resolution, and we sent a response directly back to the ANC with regard to all of the points that were in the resolution. And that was part of the, I believe that was part of a packet that we sent to the council with this resolution.
Actually, I don't know.
If we didn't, we can make sure that
Would
you all have that.
make a point to give us the ANC comments on
Yes.
both plans? So if the characterization is that Office of Planning didn't work with the ANCs, you would say, no, you did.
Yes. What I do want to clarify on to date, we have not, my understanding is we have not received a resolution from ANC 7C regarding Nanny Helen Burroughs.
Okay. What about no planning behind the call for 4,000 new residents and implications of more detailed, a need for a more detailed analysis of the implications for transportation and other impacts?
So we, the Office of Planning prepared a development framework for New York Avenue. And as part of that, that included sets of design analysis, land use analysis in the plan itself. Additionally, we did an infrastructure analysis, which is available on our website, that looks at issues of utility and transportation and with regard to what's proposed in the development framework.
And that's the comprehensive plan or the small area plan?
So the New York Avenue development framework was not a small area plan.
Correct.
But with all of the analysis, it is a future planning analysis area. And so the future planning analysis that we did was that development plan, and accompanying that was an infrastructure assessment.
I think I'm following, but let me restate. So if the small area plan for Ivy City says, or is premised on there being 4,000 new residents, the basis for that and the implications in terms of impacts on infrastructure would be found with the work behind the comprehensive plan amendments in 2021?
Would be found behind the New York Avenue infrastructure assessment, and it looks at, and it is inclusive of the area that includes Ivy City.
That was done as part of the comprehensive plan.
That was done after the passage of the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan
Called for this.
called
feature.
for it, so we did it, and that result is available online.
I have more questions, but I'll turn to Mr. Parker. Thank you.
It's good to see you, Director.
You too.
A subtext to this is that there are longstanding businesses and residents in Ivy City that are at risk of being displaced. And so it's not so much that neighbors are against development, they're against folk pushing them out of their communities. And the small area plan, Office of Planning notes that up to a third of residents may be displaced. And there is a number of recommendations that you include around anti-displacement mechanisms. I have a question. To what extent do you coordinate with agencies like DHCD to implement the recommendations that you have for anti-displacement, knowing that you see that a third of residents may not be able to call Ivy City home once the work begins there?
Certainly. So I guess I'll use an example from some of the other small area plans that the council has adopted, and now it's time for implementation. So we certainly work with other agencies. In the case of the Pennsylvania Avenue Small Area Plan, the focus there is a bit more about economic development, so coordinating directly with the Main Street. And so as soon as that plan was adopted, we started working with the Main Street and DSLBD and meeting with them regularly about the recommendations in that plan and how to move them forward. What were the resource needs associated with them, whether they're staffing, whether they're partnerships.
So Ivy
coordination,
City in
that kind of
particular, assuming the council adopts the small area plan, there would be a regular cadence with you and DHCD, I would presume other agencies, to say, how do we implement these recommendations?
That is correct.
And in your experience, are they bound by the, well, not bound by the recommendations, but do they work to honor them? Or is it, if it works out with their own strategy? Because I would imagine DHCD has a broader strategy for the city that they're executing. How do we layer on these specific requests for Ivy City into what they're pushing for?
So the layering on, that would happen in those coordinating meetings that happen after
Got
the
it.
adoption. The adoption, it adds an extra, what do I want to say, extra targeting of focus for, you know, a geographic targeting it would be in this case, right? That adds, it says we've all agreed that this is really important for us to move forward with. And so
Yes.
that would be.
We've agreed. I will be honest, I don't have a lot of faith in DHCD. I've just been a little disappointed in their execution. And so given that we have just about all of the recommendations for anti-displacement going through that agency, which seems appropriate, the question I would have is how do we hold them to that? But I want to go further. So just naming some of these recommendations, exploring approaches for prioritizing the district's investments to reduce displacement pressures by increasing affordable housing, exploring approaches for helping Ivy City residents purchase small apartment buildings, identify properties in Ivy City that are both vacant and tax delinquent and convert them to dedicated affordable housing, add residential uses along Oakey Street, Fenwick Street, Kendall Street that meet the affordability needs of current Ivy City residents, help Ivy City residents with lower incomes purchase homes in the community, and the list goes on. I want to come to one of these. So this recommendation, add residential uses along Oakey, Fenwick, and Kendall Streets. Greg Caston, in his testimony, and Greg is the owner of Ivy City Smokehouse, longtime business in Ivy City. One of his remarks suggested when OP released the draft small area plan for comments, it did not include any supplemental planning guidance or specific recommendations for FLUM and or zoning changes for either Oakey or Fenwick streets. So can you speak to that? in terms of the specific supplemental guidance for those streets, although you are suggesting as a recommendation that DHCD add residential uses along those streets.
So just to clarify, this recommendation 1.4 about adding the residential
Yes.
uses. To be transparent, this was our way of threading the needle between the fact that a small area plan cannot amend the comprehensive plan and the desire that we heard for more mix of uses on Oakey Street. And so the idea is that there's an opportunity in our comprehensive plan rewrite, which will start up in 2025, to be able to revisit that issue in a way that does not essentially violate the approach of small area plans, not explicitly amending with zoning guidance or land use guidance that is not aligned with the comprehensive plan.
So am I to assume that that will come at a later date? Those specific recommendations and guidance?
Those recommendations would be a part of a public dialogue. We would put those out for a public dialogue about whether or not there should be a revisiting of the land use designations along
Okay.
Oakey Street.
Greg also said there is no supplemental planning analysis that takes a finer grain look at Ivy City for the potential to achieve mixed use development under the current comp plan, nor are there any definitive recommendations for future changes to the FLUM as part of the upcoming comp plan process. And so that gets to what we were just talking about. And what I took from his comments are like, it's one thing to say, here's a goal for these streets and Ivy City in general. And what I think I'm taking away from your feedback is like those, as he would say, finer grained or more specific guidance will come later when we get to the comp plan.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. I want to go to a few other things. We heard from testimony from Parisa about Offices of Planning's racial equity lens. And I know that is something that I wrote to you about, and I do really appreciate your office taking those comments to heart and reissuing a revised small area plan. Can you walk us through like how you're using a racial equity lens and how it informed the development of this small area plan?
Sure. So in the beginning, as we start the work around kind of looking at what is the community today, we take a look back and we look at the history and really document and work to understand kind of the history of the land use, the history of the people, the history of the development of the community, and think about what aspects of that we need to think about going forward. And we also, in our engagement, talk with the community about parts of history that are not documented that ought to be. And in some ways, that's where recommendations related to commemoration come into play that you will find in both small area plans. We also look at data and analysis of data, and we put that data in front of communities and demographic data, and where there's pieces that are missing, gaps, either because our data is just incomplete, we ask the community to fill in those gaps for us. And that happens certainly in the context of Ivy City, where we really needed to disaggregate data even further and to make sure that the issues and concerns that were raised in the community engagement process, where we could connect the data more through deeper disaggregation, we did do that. As it relates to recommendations, part of the racial equity lens is thinking about kind of who's participating and making sure that we are getting the best information and connections with residents, and where that's missing, we ask for support and assistance in reaching people and better methods to do that. And that happened in the case of both of these small area plans. And in the development of the recommendations, if there's something that is missing, particularly as it relates to racial equity, we ask for people to provide us some recommendations, or at least provide us the concerns so we can think about how to change the recommendations that we put forward to be more targeted. And we did that.
I appreciate that. And I do you, and I was a part of some of those community engagement meetings, and so I take that to heart. How will that lens follow through to the comp plan, and how will you apply it? Because the elephant in the room for me as it relates to Ivy City is that we are talking about a predominantly Black community right now that is low to middle income, that is facing many challenges with a deep DPW facility, environmental concerns, lack of basic amenities in the community that don't seem addressed in the small area plan head on. And so how will you take that lens and apply it to our working through the comp plan?
So one of the things that, well, one, I'm going to take this feedback that you're sharing today and make sure our comp plan team, we spend a little time really thinking through that and really understanding how we might be able to elevate whether they're environmental justice communities or communities that have experienced disinvestment. How do we make sure that as we think about kind of the future, what are the kind of unique considerations, the unique characteristics that we need to think about to make sure that those neighborhoods, as we think about future land use scenarios, receive the benefits of what might happen through growth and development, and what are the policies that are necessary. I mean, the comp plan is a policy document.
That's right.
And so making sure that we are looking at the policies that we need for those particular communities, whether they have commonalities or are entirely disparate, it's up to us to try to figure out how to manage that.
Mr. Chairman, if I could have 2 additional minutes, I'll give a starting place.
Okay.
I know the comp plan references the Production, Distribution, Repair Land Use Report, or PDR. I think that is a great place to start. We know that the majority of our PDR land is in Ward 5 and in Black and Brown communities in Wards 5, 7, and 8. I don't think that's by happen chance. So when we talk about a racial justice lens, I think that is a great place to start. And a question there is, how can we, as we move towards the comp plan, receive specific recommendations for how we better distribute our PDR land across the district? Another way to ask that is, how do we address the overburdening of certain communities like Ivy City, like Brentwood, and many others like them, where they have trash transfer plants, DPW facilities, unit factories, and the list goes on?
So one of the things that that's a great question. One of the things that we're thinking about, council member, is how these scenarios, and even before we get into thinking about what are the land use scenarios that for the comp plan, because we're looking to 2050, right? How do we think about kind of growth and development over that span of time? How can it address those issues head on? What are the scenarios that are that would get you there? And what are the trade-offs that are required? And what are the priorities and policies that are required? So it's really, we are looking forward to kind of putting that in front of our 690,000 residents of the district and the subset that really spend time with us on that. We're looking forward to putting that in front of everyone for a conversation about that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Parker. Ms. Cozart, this is really a minor thing, but committees have to deal with minor things. On the Nanny Helen Burroughs plan, Ms. Jones pointed out a number of like typos and some errors like that. How do those get fixed? Because what we have is a resolution to approve a plan, and we're actually not able to amend anything through this process. We are when we have the comprehensive plan, which, just for the record, we're unable to introduce. That has to come from the mayor. But once it's introduced, we can make all the changes we want to. But with this resolution, it's either a yes or no vote. So how do these errors get corrected?
So we can make a commitment to, before issuing a final draft, that these typos would be corrected. I was looking at our senior counsel to think about whether or not there needed to be something other than me saying on the record that we're committed to fixing the typos. It feels like that's in the spirit of the small area plan.
I think so, and I
requirements.
think you have the authority, and if we're talking about something like Helen being spelled with two L's or Division Avenue being written as Division Street, so there will be a final document issued,
Correct.
and that's where that will be fixed.
Yes.
Let me just see if there was anything else I wanted to cover here. Yeah, a couple of things. You might have covered this with Mr. Parker, and unfortunately, I was not paying close attention. Don't take it personally. But actually, there was something that's going to be announced later this afternoon. Can you speak to the concerns raised by Mr. Caston and Profish?
Yes, we did speak about that.
So this is your chance to reaffirm or to get it a little different.
I reaffirm it. This is my chance to be even more concise. Mr. Caston was requesting some specific guidance that we felt essentially might be outside of the bounds of what a small area plan should do. That's the kind of guidance that really should come out of a comprehensive plan and not a small area plan that's intended to be supplemental guidance.
Was that your thread the needle
Yes,
comment earlier?
that was my thread the needle comment.
Oh, I did pay attention.
You did.
Give me just a second here. I want to go down a difficult path here. And this is more just to speak about the issue of displacement rather than specifically the plans. So there's been testimony today regarding concern about displacement of longstanding residents, lower income residents, and African-American residents. And this has been a concern from time to time with regard to the comprehensive plan or these small area plans. It seems to me that displacement occurs in one of two ways, and tell me if I've got this wrong. One would be an individual or family is directly displaced, as in property is bought and the residents there are forced to move. The other kind of displacement is more economical. The neighborhood changes in terms of the economics, values go up, and people can't afford, or they actually see the possibility of cashing in, if you will, with the increased values and leaving that way. So I would say economically forced out or directly forced out. Am I missing anything?
I think you've captured it well. One that we do appreciate talking about and really comes out of our engagement work around both of these plans is around cultural displacement, sense of not kind of belonging anymore, and the kind of historic, whether it's you think of it as political power or influence, or that history feels like that's being removed through change that happens in the neighborhood.
Okay.
Little different.
Yes. How do we address the latter two? So the first was directly forced out, and I think we do have some policies in place. If somebody's a renter, there are some provisions in the rent control law. Maybe they're not sufficient, or maybe there could be more, but we do, I think, in some ways address that. But the latter two would be the economically forced out or the cultural displacement. How do we address that?
So the economically forced out, one of the things that we certainly have been looking at is kind of taking a step back, and this is where we do bring in other agencies. We did some work on kind of thinking about upward mobility, this idea of moving from kind of economic instability, whether that's in housing or your employment or your assets, to being able to kind of thrive and be in a prosperous situation. And what are the sets of alignment of resources, both inside government, but also in the private sector, that allow families in the district to move from that instability to greater stability. And it's a host of things, and happy to share more about that. But the idea of this kind of alignment is really important. What comes out in from that in some of our small area plans is this piece about kind of outreach and making sure that everyone is aware of the sets of programs, initiatives, and that kind of thing, and that government gets information about when they're not working as effectively and who's not hearing about them. So that's one piece. On the cultural side, and this is something I'm proud we were able to embed in these small area plans and a few others, was this piece around commemoration. And Chairman, you've provided some leadership on this, the idea of kind of culture and belonging, especially around kind of what has been the history and the impact on the people and places of that history and culture. So on Nannie Helen Burroughs, we've been able to successfully work with artists to imagine kind of what is the representation of the historic Black businesses in a piece of art that people can interact with, that can be placed along Nannie Helen Burroughs Avenue. So that's one example related to kind of cultural displacement. And so we'd like to kind of build on that even more.
So if I'm going to go back to the economic displacement. So if the economic displacement is because individuals or families are not taking advantage of government programs that would help them, I get what you're saying. But what if the economic displacement is because individuals or families are saying, hey, I bought this house for $40,000, or my parents bought the house for $40,000. It's now worth $500,000. I'm going to take the cash and move. I mean, we see neighborhoods turn over because of some of that. How do we deal with that? Or can we?
That's an excellent question. In some ways that,
this committee only asks excellent
I
questions.
know. And in some ways that, I think whether we think about that as something to deal with, and there's an opportunity to think about that as a way to kind of open the next door. So in the context, I got to sit on the Black Homeownership Strike Force, and what the example that you're talking about is something that we talked about a lot. And that strike force included faith-based leaders, it included realtors, it included nonprofit affordable housing developers, government folks as well. And we talked about where that opportunity comes forward that someone wants to move on. Is there a way to that level of affordability that may exist there because they made an investment many decades ago, and the value they want to be able to take that with them and pass that on to their family members? Is there a way that that home, for example, could be something that nonprofit affordable housing developers could create an opportunity for a would-be homeowner, right? To transition from that place of not knowing what their rent may be from year to year to a place of knowing what that housing payment would be. We didn't answer that question, or we came up with that as a priority. Do we have a program behind it just yet? Not yet, but I'm hopeful that we will.
Because I think it would be difficult to. I mean,
Yeah.
I'll put it a different way, and that is that we talk about home ownership as being a way toward wealth building. What good is the wealth building if you can't take the wealth out of it? So, and if I'm the one whose parents, and it's not likely, but I'm the one whose parents bought the house for $25,000 and now it's worth $500,000, I'm not going to be enthusiastic about selling it for less than $500,000 to a nonprofit affordable housing provider. I'm gonna want my full 500,000.
So to clarify, we were not thinking about you would have to sell it less than what you wanted to sell it at. But this idea, especially for ones that may have not been improved and they're at that $500,000 level, there are some nonprofit affordable housing developers who could do something with that that could create an affordable homeownership opportunity. Whereas part of it is around the speculation that we know exists and how that could be bid up so far out of reach for many would-be homeowners. So that's what we were trying to
Yeah.
solve for. I hope that helps to clarify.
I think it's a longer discussion, but yes, it does. Anything more? You don't get to take the full 10
Okay,
minutes.
great. I did just want to come back to this PDR issue and wanting to also get a sense of like the work with DDOT, knowing that given the concentration of a lot of industrial land in Ward 5, there's often a lot of traffic related on main thoroughfares like New York Avenue, Bladensburg, Rhode Island. What coordination is there between OP, DDOT, as you're making these land use recommendations as we move towards the comp plan?
So there is definitely coordination. There was coordination deeply with DDOT for our 2021 comp plan. They reviewed all of the recommendations and gave input and guidance, and we, got.
And I'm
to a-
assuming that is happening behind the scenes.
That happens, yes, that happens just agency to agency, but then it may be behind the scenes, but it's a public draft. And so people see the public draft that reflects what DDOT's comments are and their guidance. The same process happens with our small area plan. So
Got it.
DHCD, DDOT, DOE, all the agencies that are listed anywhere in here, they've reviewed these recommendations.
So
and
when I
given-
hear Parisa raise the question of like, how are we going to have such density on New York Avenue, I'm to assume DDOT has already signed off to say, oh, this is plausible and it works.
That is correct.
Got it. Two commitments I'm hoping we can get. One, my team has pored over this PDR land use report issued in May of this year. And we feel as though the recommendations need to go further. And it would be great if we could work with your office before we get to the comp plan process to supplement the recommendations in this report, namely through the lens of racial equity that we talked about earlier, understanding that a lot of the industrial land is in parts of Ward 5. Are you game for that?
Yes.
Awesome. And then secondly, what I heard through the testimony of folk like Greg and the Commissioner Sabrina Rhodes and Parisa and many others is they want more engagement. Now, I know Office of Planning did a lot of engagement around this, but I do think there's an opportunity after the council votes on the small area plan to engage with Office of Planning as you're meeting with other agencies like DHCD, like DDOT and others. And the request there, is there a commitment to work with my office to provide a platform for the community to interface with you as you're having those interagency conversations, namely with DHCD, and I would throw in DDOT?
Yes.
Awesome. So we will follow up and I would love to coordinate with you on that. But I want to make sure that the community feels as though this is an iterative process and their voice is going to be heard throughout. But thank you for your testimony. I want to thank you again for your responsiveness, both to my feedback, and I know there was a lot of criticism today, but I hope you also understand that that is rooted in a great level of injustice that has been happening across the district for decades, namely geared towards Black and brown communities. And people just want to make sure that we don't repeat the cycle in Ivy City.
That's fair. Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Parker. I have no further questions for you. I want to note the record will be open for 2 weeks. That is, the record will close at 5 p.m. on November 15th. Number of witnesses didn't submit testimony. Please do so within the next 2 weeks. And if anybody wants to supplement their testimony or they didn't testify and they want to submit comments, do so within 2 weeks. We will file the record with whatever we've received by 5 PM on November 15th. We are possibly going to schedule this for markup on November 26th. I'll note again what I said earlier, the rules around small area plans are that they're deemed approved, in this case, December 20th, if the council takes no action. And with that, I want to thank all the witnesses for their testimony. And the time is 12:23 in the afternoon, and this hearing is adjourned.